And welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you on CGTN from Beijing. We begin today's program by examining China-Russia relations. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said relations have been the tightest in history since two countries established diplomatic ties 7 decades ago. And when Chinese President Xi Jinping meets with Russian President Vladimir Putin this week in Russia, their goal is to make the partnership even closer. The two neighbors have been deepening economic ties and have carried out joint military exercises. They are also bonded by challenges such as rising unilateralism and climate change. Between Beijing and Moscow, what can we learn from past exchanges and where does the future lead? Before we go to our panelists, take a look at this.
Since U.S. President Donald Trump took office, he has adopted a Cold War mentality, applied sanctions against Russia, and launched a trade war against China. The U.S.'s protectionism and unilateralism make people think President Xi's visit to Russia this week will push China and Russia ties to a higher level and would set an example for relations between major countries. The strategic cooperation partnership between China and Russia will add resilience to both economies in the current uncertain global environment.
For more discussion on China-Russia ties in Moscow, we have Alexander Lukin, Professor and Director of East Asian and SCO Studies at the Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Good to see you, sir. In Washington, D.C., we have Anton Fedashin, Professor of Russian History at the American University. Good to see you, Professor. And last but not least, joining us in the Beijing studio, Cui Hongjian, Director of the Department for European Studies from the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome as well. Let me go to you first, Professor Lukin. Will an unpredictable United States bringing China and Russia ever closer?
They certainly do, but it's not the only or the most important factor of Russian-Chinese rapprochement and good relations, because it started the process of improvement of relations started long ago, long before President Trump came to power. But he certainly gave it a new push, and especially. Well, I would say that the new period started a bit early in 2014, when the United States applied sanctions, used sanctions against Russia. But now they did the same thing against China, so both countries are quite dissatisfied with the United States. This is one of the factors of at least speeding up the process.
How big is the American factor in this relationship between Moscow and Beijing, Mr. Cui?
I think if we look at this relations between China and Russia, always we can find maybe two different categories. Firstly, yes, there are a lot of the pressure from outside. At this moment, certainly, just like the Russian guest mentioned, this tension between China and the U.S. give another dynamic for strengthening China-Russia relations. But of course, we need also take the importance of internal, monument for the bilateral relations between China and Russia, because firstly, they are biggest neighbors with each other. I think how to deal with these neighborhoods very, very important for the foreign policy for both two countries. Secondly, more and more economic cooperation and more trade and more, people-to-people contact. I think that all of this will give a very, very strong dynamic for bilateral relations.
How much do you think, Professor Lukin, about the so-called the way to look at the world and the world order will be able to put the two countries together strategically? And when it comes to strategically, it's usually very strong, not like on one issue or another. Is this the moment, or is it too early to say it?
Well, from American point of view, there is a mythical liberal world order which doesn't really exist. And from that point of view, they say that Russia and China undermine that world order. But you cannot really undermine something that does not exist. And if Russia and China think that the real world order is the kind of world order that came into existence after the Second World War, based on, let's say, the leading role of the United Nations and the Security Council. And from that point of view, the United States actually is the country which undermines that world order. And Russia and China are actually conservative forces. They want to maintain that world order because it's good for them, and they both gained from that kind of world order.
Right. Professor Vedashian, in Washington, of course, we saw Washington earlier made effort by the Secretary of State, usually being believed as one that is pretty much against everything about Russia, but did travel to Moscow and meet with the Russian president and said a few, at least, pleasing words. But whether he has a lot to get back home, I'm not sure about that. But now you see during the state visit of the Chinese President Xi Jinping, China and Russia is going to have, once again, very close interaction, one of the many recently. So, Professor Vedashian, what do you think is the role of the United States that it aspires to play, particularly regarding its relationship with Russia now, as China-U.S. trade war probably is the biggest priority on President Trump's agenda in order to win more political support for his re-election?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Tianwei. There are levels of schizophrenia in Washington, D.C. in relation to both its policy towards Russia and towards the broader world. On the one hand, one level of the split, let's put it that way, is between the Trump administration and the U.S. Congress. And to an unprecedented degree in American history, Capitol Hill has inserted itself into the running of American foreign policy. And on Capitol Hill, the feeling right now, as it has been for at least 4 years now, is incredibly anti-Russian. And the feeling in the White House is a lot more moderately so. The other form of schizophrenia is this policy formation towards Russia itself. On the one hand, it seems that the White House would love to use Russia as a tool against China. On the other hand, it also wants to keep Russia down. And the result of these levels of bifurcation and uncertainty in foreign policy has been to drive China and Russia together. There is a reason why one of the most persistent and vocal critics of both the Obama administration's policies and the Trump administration's policies towards Russia has been Henry Kissinger, who is living through watching the work that he and Nixon had done in the 1970s to outmaneuver the Soviets and bring China onto the American side, so to speak. He's watching it unravel before his eyes.
Very interesting. Professor Cui, though, in Beijing, despite all of this strategic thinking and debate that we're having right now, apparently, what is really important probably is what's going to happen to some of the most important events and projects near us for the next weeks and months to come. So, Mr. Cui, one, of course, is about the G20 summit. Whether there is likely to be some kind of consensus at the critical juncture of the world when they look at very different ways about seeking a future. Will China and Russia really see eye to eye on some of these critical issues, Professor Cui? Can we expect that much from them?
Certainly. I think the forthcoming G20 summit will be a very important platform for the world leaders to discuss some very urgent issue and important issue. And also it will give another opportunity for China and Russia to have some more coordination on all of these big issues. Of course, now it looks like some economic issue, especially related to the multilateral, trade arrangement, WTO reform, and some other will be, on the center of this agenda. But now I think that in a large degree, I think China and Russia will contribute more to keep the so-called, as we know, the stability, at a global level.
I see.
But now the question is, I think so far, Russia has less, capability in economy and also in discourse in WTO reform or some other. So I think certainly China will looking for some more assistance or cooperation from Russia. But of course, I think before that, China and Russia should pay more attention, should have some made some more effort to develop the economy and to get some more economic cooperation.
It's no secret that Washington is trying to, in a way, divide earlier with the Secretary of State's mission to Moscow. But one has to confess that that's not an easy job when he's trying to make a last effort recently only to Beijing and Moscow. But tell me about the expectations of Washington, you know, seeing China and Russia getting ever closer. Does it remind Washington of anything, the chills of the Cold War, for example? Meanwhile, on the other hand, how much is Washington now, especially with the current administration, trying to shape everything and push everything to the Cold War direction? I guess that's a very interesting question, isn't it, Professor?
Yes, it certainly is. Listen, let me reiterate again for your viewers the profound division in Washington itself about foreign policy in general and specifically about foreign policy and trade, economic policy, both towards China and towards Russia, between the White House and Capitol Hill. This division makes it almost impossible to make definitive statements about what Washington wants to do, because every time someone asks me that question, I have to ask, which Washington do you mean, Capitol Hill or the White House? That's the first problem. The second problem, of course, is that there doesn't seem to be a clear understanding on either side, both at the White House or on Capitol Hill, about the consequences of American policies both towards China and towards Russia. You know, Americans are very good at business by and large, which is why it's, you know, this country still has the world's largest economy. But it seems that when it comes to foreign policy, that pragmatic side of the American mind seems to be sort of marginalized or turned off. And so the desire to establish American primacy across the world vis-a-vis China or Russia isn't really calculated into the broader spectrum, the broader equation of what's going to happen as a result. And the result, as we've seen, is to bring Russia and China closer together. But this is not just a Trump administration problem. The Obama administration started to negotiate the Trans-Pacific Partnership to the exclusion of China. They should have realized what effect that was going to have. The Bush administration completely failed to calculate the consequences of its actions in the Middle East. So what we're seeing right now is really a much broader, a tectonic shift in the structure of global geopolitics, the de-Westernization and de-Americanization of international affairs, with very powerful players now coming to the fore, China, India, and Russia being the foremost ones.
Very interesting. Well, at the same time, there's another layer of issues that is someone is trying to push the so-called decoupling. As a result of that, Professor Lukin, you're going to see global supply chain as well as technological advances and cooperation, culture, education, academic exchanges, not to mention political ties, likely to be shaped in a different way if we are going ever closer to the verge of decoupling. That is a very dangerous situation, but one cannot rule out that possibility. Therefore, how much Russia and China is planning ahead? As we all know, it's very important right now. Professor Lukin, is Russia, Moscow thinking about that?
Sure. Well, what Russia found out a bit earlier after 2014 and what China is finding out now is that their economies, the model of their economies were very much dependent on the West, on the United States, because they never believed that the United States was going to use its position to for political reasons or for ideological reasons, as my American colleague has just said. He actually said that it's the United States policy became very much ideologized, let's say. Because of that, we both were quite unprepared. So what we now need to do is to protect our banking system, our economic system, from dependency on the United States, like spare parts, finances. Like one part of it is the so-called de-dollarization of economic exchanges, so we can live without the United States or under pressure, because this pressure is not going to go away in the foreseeable future. It is now clear. And I think that President Trump's role is that he explained this to China very well, and now China is beginning to understand it. Because China used to criticize Russia for being too tough on the United States, like between 2014 and 2017 or 18, let's say. But I always told my Chinese friends that you just wait, they haven't started yet. So now they did. So now it's very clear.
Your Chinese counterpart and your American counterpart are both smiling and laughing while you're making this certainly very thought-provoking, I would say, statement over there. Mr. Cui, of course, that's in a joking matter. Mr. Lukin said it, but there is the danger, as we mentioned earlier, of so-called decoupling and their world being divided into two or three or several pieces. So, Mr. Cui, is China preparing for that danger? That, of course, is a potential danger for now, but you never know. And then, if preparing, what's going to be the role of Russia as China sees it?
So far, I think from China's perspective, China has been trying every best to avoid this kind of situation. I mean, firstly, decoupling in economy, technology, and the global value chain, and then also, there will be maybe a bad destination for this situation would be the new Cold War, as we understand. So I think, of course, at the same time, because China also trying to do something and to prepare any maybe worse situation which will happen. If we look at this cooperation between China and Russia, especially in the frame of Belt and Road Initiative and also Euro-Asia Economic Union, we can find out once there are more cooperation between China and Russia, economically, politically, strategically, not only in Euro-Asia, continent, and also in some other regions, I think they will give more space or more, instruments once this bad situation happens.
Right. Well, this is only one of those many times that it seems that the presidents of China and of Russia are to meet, and they're also likely to meet at the heads of state meeting of SCO for later of June. There are a lot of international and interactions to come between these two countries. For now, before we go, final words from all of you, if you can, one sentence and one sentence only, please, gentlemen. What can we expect from this round of exchange between China and Russia, the two presidents? Mr. Kardashian?
Yes, I am very optimistic about what will come out, but let me just mention two things that I find of somewhat concern. Number one, yes, the relationship between China and Russia is becoming too personalized by the relation between Putin and Xi. And number two, is Russia producing enough China specialists in order to build the support for what is clearly an important relationship for both countries?
Are you trying to ask that question to Professor Lukin? It seems that you are trying to. Professor Lukin, very briefly respond, and your thought, one sentence if you can, sir.
Right. We welcome Mr. Xi Jinping, President Xi Jinping in Russia, and it's very important that he comes he's coming to St. Petersburg Economic Forum, so we are waiting for some significant economic agreements to be signed there.
Well, sounds promising. Last but not least, Mr. Cui.
China and Russia will have more shared future, not only because of the United States.
All right, there we go. Cui Hongjian, Alexander Lukin, and Tim Fitashian. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us.